Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm Jeff Pender, and joined here today with my Mississippi Today colleagues. First off, Laura Santhanam, our health editor. And did I get that right? We practiced.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
First time on the podcast, I believe.
Yep, it's my first rodeo. Yeah.
Been doing some great work with us, the health team, and that is today's topic. Your team and one person we'll introduce in a minute in particular has been doing some really good work looking at how Mississippi is dealing with the settlement money it's getting from the opioid crisis and litigation. Right. So give us a little explainer, and then if you would introduce our person of the hour.
Yeah. Well. Again, thank you so much for being here and for having us. I'm here today with mental health reporter Allen Siegler, who has been just played such a vital role in chronicling how the opioid crisis has played out in recent months, right. As far as Mississippi goes. But I mean, of course, this is not just a Mississippi problem. This is something that has touched every corner of this country for years, unfortunately. But Allen has played an important role in letting us know how this is taking shape in this state. I mean, it's certainly a tragedy that has unfolded across so many families. Allen has spoken to several of them, and now we're learning more about how the state has responded to those tragedies. And I would love to hear, Allen, just kind of how you see where we are in this.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, both of you, for the kind words. I didn't know where the third person was going to go. I was like this pesky person, but no, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I got started at Mississippi Today in April. It's about 7-8 months now, and one of the first things I was assigned to do was kind of take a check of where we were with opioid settlement distribution. So the opioid epidemic unfolded over the past 3 decades, has devastated Mississippi families across the state, from the coast to the northern border. I believe over 10,000 Mississippians have died.
Yeah, I've seen that stat in your work. That's pretty astounding. 10,000 overdose deaths?
Since 2000.
Wow.
Since the year 2000, I should say. Yeah.
10,000 overdose, over 10,000. And that's, Laura and I talk a lot about this. That's almost certainly an undercount.
Right.
Exactly. It has to be. So it's devastating. Talking to families, it just rips people apart, rips people from their families. The ripples of that affect the immediate family, sure, but also best friends, the communities at large. It's terrible.
Creates craters, really.
And one of the things that, Laura and I have talked about for a while is this isn't the first opioid epidemic the country has experienced. There were a couple other ones, usually after wars, where people turned to drugs like morphine and heroin, other opioids, to address their pain. This is one of the first ones where companies have played a very major role.
Exactly.
So you had companies in the 90s the FDA approving pharmaceuticals that were opioid pain pills that were highly addictive, and allowing those companies to advertise their products as not so, of being safe. And then you had a lot of other companies allowing these pills to just flood counties across the country, across Mississippi, small towns across the country, across Mississippi. And it builds up this reservoir of addiction throughout the country. And that led to, when government regulations came in the 2010s to prevent some of the pills from being distributed quite as much, it led a lot of people who developed opioid addictions because of this marketing to turn to street drugs. So then initially heroin, and then very quickly after that, fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. Right. And that was the basis. That corporate role was the basis for these opioid settlements.
Mass litigation, and now I guess we're to the point now that we're seeing some of the money settlement from that come in, correct?
Yeah, so I believe what I've totaled so far of the money, so we're talking companies like AmerisourceBergen, well, they're called Cencora now, Cardinal Health, Johnson & Johnson, McKesson, Walgreens, Walmart, very big companies. And then Purdue was just finalized this summer, as appears to be on track to being finalized right now. And all of those settlements have amounted to about $421 million that Mississippi is expected to get over the next 15 years. It started receiving its first funds in 2022. That's the earliest record I can find. And as of this summer, it had received about $124 million. So it's well on its way in that process, and a process that started a few years ago very quietly. No one really, the Attorney General, Lynn Fitch, here in Mississippi, she created a contract that said some of the money would go to local governments, another chunk of the money would go to the state legislature, and then the most of the money would go for the Mississippi Medical Center to build a new addiction treatment center. Parts of that plan were realized. The money was sent to the local governments, where we didn't really hear much about that for a while. But then the legislature changed another big portion, the University of Mississippi Medical Center portion of it. They changed that money from going to UMMC to being managed more by the legislature. So 70% of the money now is ultimately controlled by the legislature, but advised by a council that was created last spring that draws on a lot of people who have unique perspectives on addiction throughout Mississippi, 37 people, I believe, in total, and had them over the last 5-6 months solicit applications for projects that addressed opioid addiction in Mississippi, reviewed those applications and graded them, and then recently submitted graded applications to the legislature.
And that's the Opioid Settlement Fund Advisory Council that Attorney General Lynn Fitch is one of the co-chairs for. Is that?
She is the chair. She is the chair, and then the Department of Mental Health Executive Director Wendy Bailey and State Health Officer Dr. Dan Edney are the two co-vice chairs.
Got it. Great.
But yeah, so that's all to say that this process has been well underway for about 3 years, but it's ramping up right now too.
Okay. And this council is making recommendations, and the legislature is about to spend over $100 million.
They could.
This coming, or that's in the works for about $100 million of it.
So parts of the plan of Fitch's original plan that were kept were the 15% that was going to the legislature, to the state general fund. That's kept. It's framed a little bit differently. It's framed as non-abatement money now, but reading the text of the bill, the legislature can do whatever it wants with that, as long as it follows the rules of other public money. And the local money was also kept as going directly to 147 local governments in Mississippi, and being able to be spent on whatever public purpose the elected officials in those areas see fit. So yes, the legislature has about $100 million right now at their disposal that has to be spent for opioid addiction-related purposes. That's what the settlements say.
Within some guidelines or categories?
Yeah, the settlements came up with these lists called Exhibit Es within the lawsuits. And these Exhibit Es are pretty extensive lists of ways that any government managing this money, anyone really managing this money and overseeing this money can spend this money. I've heard it criticized, some of these lists. There are a bunch of different ones. Each lawsuit has a different Exhibit E. And I've heard some of them criticized for being a bit too open-ended as to what this money can be spent on. So yeah, that is, but it's one of the set of guidelines that govern this money that the council is overseeing. So right now there's about $100 million. And then the legislature also has another roughly $14-15 million at their disposal that they can spend however they see fit.
So, I mean, zooming out a little bit, can you talk about how, a little bit more about like how we got here? You've certainly been looking at this issue and how the settlement money has been developed and spent over the last few months. When you initially started looking, what sort of set Mississippi, or how did Mississippi compare to other states in how that money was being recorded, spent? Can you take me there a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the unique things for Mississippi was that there were a couple things. One of the most notable things that struck me immediately was that there was money going to local governments. We knew that. That's what the contract said, and there was that Attorney General Fitch created, and there were no changes to that. We knew that there was some amount of money that was going to the local governments, and I just heard nothing about it. And one of a Mississippi Today intern last summer, Violet Gira, she produced a story that touched a little bit on some local governments, how they were thinking about it. I think she found one example of spending on the coast for about $4,000. So we knew a tiny bit about like that this money was going to local governments, but largely we knew nothing. And a big reason for that is because Attorney General Fitch wrote a contract that said the governments could spend it on anything and did not need to record any of their purchases for internal records for the public to see. There's no record of it that they were required to keep. And
no requirement that it address the underlying issue.
Right.
Exactly. And that was a unique concept. I think this idea, that was a concept I was unfamiliar with until I got to Mississippi. I'd done some reporting in West Virginia and in Georgia beforehand, and they were also getting opioid settlement money, and their elected officials created contracts that said all the money has to be spent for addressing addiction. So I didn't think much about it at the time. I thought that's just how the settlements worked. But when I got here, I learned that up to 30% of the money could be spent on anything. Only 70% of the money had to be spent for addressing addiction for each state. And Mississippi had maximized that. Attorney General Fitch and the legislature had maximized that portion that was able to be spent on any public purpose. And that's unusual for states. Most states say that 100% of the money has to be used for addressing addiction somehow.
What were some of the more surprising things that you found that money was being spent on in Mississippi?
Yeah, so I didn't know how a lot of this money was being spent. So I started filing some public records requests to see just what the local governments were doing with this money. I started in the Hattiesburg area. I put in public records requests with the city of Hattiesburg, Lamar County, and Forest County. And there we saw a variety of things. We saw money that was unspent. We saw money that was being sent to develop a crisis mental health center that was already planned but supplemented that project. And then we saw Forest County, which spent some of its money on the local drug court, a program to direct people away from struggling with addiction, away from the criminal justice system towards treatment, and also money for their sheriff's department, where I believe the sheriff was spending money for devices that would scan for drugs in walls. It was an x-ray machine, and among other things, there were pole cameras. There was, I believe, gun scopes made the list as well too. Wow. Gun flashlights. So that was kind of like our first lens into how this local settlement money was being spent. And then I spent the summer FOIAing and putting in public records requests with the other 144 local governments to see how they were spending it. And I think the big kind of like top line things we found was that these, at the time, which was, throughout the summer, these local governments, these cities, counties, they had received $15.5 million, about $15.5 million, and they'd only spent about less than $1 million of it
so less than 1%. Is that
less than 6%? I guess 1 million of 15 of 15.5 million. So of their money, of the total money, yes, less than 1%. Combined with the state's money as well. But it was you had over $5 million that was spent on a variety of other things, including over $4 million that was going just to the accounts for cities and counties' general expenses. So things like roads, things like payroll. And, we're in Jackson right now. The city of Jackson spent some of its money to run fiber optic cables between Fortification Street and State Street.
And so all this time, you'd been in contact with families who had lost loved ones to this crisis. When your reporting came out, what was their response to all of this that you brought to light?
They were heartbroken. I should also note that none of them, even though I think they were the most harmed by the corporations that are paying the opioid settlements, none of them are asking for money. None of them are asking for compensation, at least the people that I've met. They want to see the crisis that killed their kids gone. They wanted to see it ended.
They wanted to see the spending at least go towards that.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were hoping for, this model of there is a public health problem caused by some amounts of corporate business practices, and you can get money from those corporations to address that problem. That model comes from Mississippi. It comes from Attorney General Mike Moore.
Tobacco.
Exactly. And I think they were, that process, I don't know, I think has been criticized, and, some of the money didn't end up getting spent, but some of the money did. A lot of the money, at least in Mississippi, ended up going to address the tobacco crisis. And
prevention strategies and interventions and things to keep it from getting worse, right?
Yeah. That's my understanding of it. And they were hoping for that same type of model. And I think at least at that point, Mississippi had in total received over $124 million. And, less than $1 million was actually spent 3 years into the process. Less than $1 million was actually being spent on addressing addiction. And it was devastating I think it was just, there's a mom who lives in Jones County who I've grown to really trust as a source. And we've had a lot of conversations about how much her heart breaks in the same way as it does for her child, as it does for the person who sold him drugs, as the person who, just everyone in the ecosystem who's struggling with this disorder. I think it's just, I can't really overstate just how painful it is to be a part of this epidemic for the families, for the people struggling with addiction themselves. So,
So then thinking about people who are put in elected roles or whose job it is to try and keep this from happening over and over again, what did you hear from local and state government officials when your reporting came out?
Yeah, so at the state level, I asked Attorney General Fitch if she regretted making a contract this way. And her chief of staff, Michelle Williams, has told me a few times that the overdose crisis has cost cities and counties billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, and that the settlements allow for some of the money that Mississippi has won to go back to paying back local governments for the expenses that they had throughout the 2000s, 2010s as they were managing these crises. That is not recommended by many of the addiction prevention experts who I've talked to. It is legal. It is legal through the terms of the settlement. And Williams has also reiterated to me that the bulk of the money that Mississippi got is being managed by this advisory council, and that money is expected to go to addressing addiction. It's been delayed. It has been it's going on 3.5 years since Mississippi received its first check for actually getting that money to a place where it can help people. But that money is expected to go to addressing addiction. But I've been going to all the meetings where this council has met and has tried to manage this process. And there's been a lot of issues that have concerned recovery advocates in the state, those most impacted by addiction. At the first meeting, there's one of the council members pointed out that there was no rubric that was included in the draft application materials for assessing these grants. There was no definition of what a qualified applicant was, who could apply for some of this money. So there are a lot of holes missing in this process. There was we moved further in time after the application was released and the applications had come in and they'd been assessed by different smaller groups, subcommittees of this larger council. And we get to a point where the public first got to see how these applications were assessed in early November. And they were all grouped into 5 tiers, and then a few were disqualified for a variety of reasons. But of those 5 tiers in the draft gradings, the highest tier was tier 1, where the grants that were most recommended for being spent, the legislature approving, because the legislature is the ultimate decision maker, and 5 was the lowest. And they spent a lot of time talking about the top 2 tiers. And in those top 2 tiers had applications requesting over 100, roughly $142 million. And of those, over 94 million was requested by organizations that had at least one representative on the advisory.
The advisory board making the
Yes.
decision, which
Yes. Which
did some really good work on pointing that out.
Exactly.
Oh, thank you.
Recently.
And I mean, like, it wasn't, and it should be noted that there's no evidence that these council members voted when it graded their own applications in the formal setting. But there was a lot of informal lobbying happened that, this wasn't even behind closed doors. This was just at the meetings. So,
Right.
I mean, at one point in time, Chief Justice Michael Randolph, who is one of the voting members of the council, he's a strong believer in drug court programs in Mississippi, a program run by the Administrative Office of Courts, which he is the head of as Chief Justice of Mississippi. He spent a lot of both the November meeting and a future December meeting talking about why this application, why the Administrative Office of Courts application was really important. It was initially graded in tier 2, the second highest tier, and he repeatedly talked about why it should be graded in tier 1. He brought in a representative from the drug courts to talk about why it was important. The other applicants who didn't have council members as representatives, they didn't get that same opportunity. And ultimately, his request worked. The application was moved to tier 1. It was reduced by it went from over $60 million to $12 million is what the council ultimately recommended, but it was moved to the top tier.
Right.
So
There's been nothing, I guess, pointing towards any kind of malfeasance here, right? If I understand, the mistake or issue might have been they were attempting to appoint stakeholders to this committee, advisory council, and in doing so, they appointed the very people who would naturally request the money, I guess, in part.
they did, yeah, and they provided some conflicts of interest rules, but people I talked to said it didn't go far enough. They said that a lot of the lobbying for a lot of the decision making for how grants get assessed happens before the actual formal vote.
Yeah.
So, and there's nothing in the rules right now that prohibit it. So even though there's no malfeasance going on, it's not an equal opportunity type situation.
So, I mean, where does this go now? Like, where's this council's action stand now that you found?
So both with the local and the state council, or the state funds, the legislature in this legislative session is going to play a pretty major role. So soon after, we did our investigation into the local governments, our series, The Black Box, and soon after that, the Public Health House Chair, Representative Sam Creekmore, he said that he thought that it was unacceptable that local governments weren't spending this opioid settlement money on addressing addiction. He was going to propose some legislation, is what he told me, to address this. He came on this podcast and said that he was going to look to create some guidelines for cities, counties, to make sure that they know that they are informed of how best this money could address the problem that the lawsuits name. And we also said that I asked him if he would consider reporting requirements, so that way outside entities like Mississippi Today aren't responsible for making sure this money gets spent responsibly at the local level. He said he would definitely consider that as well. So that's something I'll be keeping my eyes on in this legislative session, is to see if he follows up on those things, and other lawmakers for that matter. For the state side of things, the council finalized their recommendations on Friday, December 5th, and sent an email to Speaker of the House, Jason White, and Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann with these recommendations. It came from Fitch's office. And the legislature, by their own law that they passed last year, their role now is to decide which of these applications to approve or not approve. And that's expected to go through the Appropriations Committee in the legislative session. And they, like we talked about, they'll have $100 million, up to around $100 million as of right now, that they can use to fund these grants, these grant applications. They don't have to follow the recommendations. They can do really they can take any of the applications that they want to and move forward on that. And so I'm interested to see if there will be kind of lobbying to legislatures right now.
I think we've heard Chairman Creekmore express optimism that the legislature will follow this advisory council or not go outside the lines there. But we don't know that. This could go into the maw of legislative appropriations and lobbying, and that could get interesting.
We'll
Time
see.
will tell for sure.
And I think, while Creekmore may want that, he's not on the leader of the Appropriations Committee
That's
as well, too. So it'll be interesting to see if they listen to him. I don't know. I'm interested to see how this goes. Yeah, this is going to be my first legislative session. So, I mean,
strap in.
You're in for a real treat.
That's what everyone's telling me.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I know we're getting a little short on time here, but do I understand correctly from what you said? We're going to be going through this process probably again and again in coming years as well, correct?
I think so. I think that at least for the state money, if Creekmore proposes bills for the local money and those pass, then that will be a bit more of a standardized process that would largely, I'd expect, happen outside the legislature. But yeah, for the state council, or based off the bill, this is a yearly thing. So we'll see what happens, and that is why I think some people I've talked to have expressed some concern about spending all $100 million right now, because that's money that's accumulated over, going on 3.5 years right now. If you spend all that money, no one's expecting Mississippi to get another $100 million, and it'll probably be something like in the tens of millions. I would probably expect somewhere between 10 million, 20 million, and 40 million for next year. So it'll be, that's another thing the legislature will have to balance. But we'll see what happens. We'll see which recommendations they take.
Here's kind of a closing question, since I have two of our foremost health experts. We've seen this settlement. We've seen a slew of laws over the years, all kinds of efforts. Are we gaining any ground on this opioid crisis? Are we seeing a little sunlight there? Or
What are you seeing, Alan, in your reporting?
I think last year we saw for the first time in a really long time, we saw a decline in overdose deaths, which was really promising. And a lot of people were very cautiously optimistic about. They're quick not to draw conclusions about what was causing the decline, but that's what I remember generally. And then, but you have to also remember that's a decline from just an unprecedented amount of death.
Right.
That is a decline. America's never experienced drug deaths like we have. First, from 2015 until 2020, that was unprecedented. And then 2020 to 2023, that took it to a whole another level of death and despair.
At one point, more than 100,000 people in a single year died from overdose deaths nationwide. Is that, am I recalling the stats correctly? Yeah. And those are known, again, so many of these numbers, as you pointed out earlier, are generally accepted as undercounts because of so many parts in the process where that can fall through the cracks.
Absolutely. So reductions, it's not getting back to a place where before Purdue Pharma first released OxyContin. We're nowhere near that. And I guess one of the things I'm hearing right now is, The opioid settlements across the country, it's expected to be around $57 billion. That is a lot of money, but another very important and probably bigger source of, programs to address addiction is Medicaid. And Medicaid, Congress, is my understanding, passed a bill this last summer that enacts a lot of cuts in the future to Medicaid that a lot of people are worried about. So I think that there is a fear among people I know in the space that some of this spending won't be able to offset the massive cuts to Medicaid.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like also too, what we've been hearing, or what I've, just over the years about the role that stigma and shame also play in sort of perpetuating the tragedy, just people being afraid to ask for help and then just kind of walling themselves off until it's too late, and then their loved ones are left to ask why they're gone. Those are like so many of these dollars have contributed to systems that can help people before it is too late. And so just remembering that those tools can have a purpose that can prevent things from going from bad to worse, I think is also important to keep in mind.
Well, nothing like ending on a dour note here in the holidays, but really it is what it is, and people hopefully will seek help, and hopefully we're going to start building an infrastructure where they can find help.
And one last point, I guess, is like, even in this environment, I think one of the reasons this process has been contentious at times is because a lot of people understand that even amid a difficult environment, opioid settlement money has the potential to really change lives,
That's right.
really prevent deaths and really prevent more just unbearable tragedies in Mississippi families. And I think the legislature this coming session has a lot of power to decide if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, again, y'all, thanks for coming on. Really good to have your insight, and I know our health team will continue its good work, Laura.
Oh, thank you.
And good to have you on the first of what I imagine will be many podcasts.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Allen.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate all you do for us.